Hey guys, welcome back. In today's video, we're going to be going over the new silent builds in Slay the Spire 2 and what I think of them. Well, let's get into it. Keep in mind that I'm not a professional Slay the Spire player and I still do not have all the silent cards unlocked. I know there are some game-changing cards like Catalyst and Corpse Explosion down the line, but I'm just judging off what I have so far, you know? So in this video, we're going to be going over two different types of builds. A poison deck and a Shiv deck. A poison deck is where we apply poison and use a bunch of power and skill cards to ramp up that poison to deal lots of damage. And a Shiv deck is where we use cards to spawn Shivs, get block, and buff our Shivs to deal a lot of damage. If you don't know, Shivs are these 0-cost 4 power cards that are very good if you get a lot of them ramping up. So, let's start by addressing our poison deck and why I think it's not amazing. So, especially in early game, when you don't have many good cards, you may have some good cards, like maybe a Bubble or Accelerant or Poison Stab, but the poison just really isn't ramping up in this game like it was in Slay the Spire 1. You will unlock Catalyst later, which will help a lot, but especially in early game, I just think poison is really underwhelming. And, you know, it doesn't apply too much defense. It can give some weak and some defense, but really in poison decks, it's just kind of underwhelming now. With low poison scaling and low damage, honestly, because of low poison scaling, it's just kind of underwhelming in the meta. Poison decks are really good at taking out bosses, or enemies that take a while to, ramp up. And that makes it so that they aren't as good at dealing with regular enemies. And if the regular enemies are super draining you, then you just really aren't having enough health or damage to fight the bosses. And elites, which are not as hard as bosses, but I think are more close to the normal enemies category. They're also decently hard to take down with poison. Now, I think if you have a poison deck, which you're mixing with pretty good defense, then you have a solid deck, but I feel like it's kind of hard to do now. Poison, I just feel like, is kind of falling off. Next, we're going to go over a deck that I think is pretty strong right now, and that is a Shiv deck. Shiv decks can apply so much damage, are great at taking down normal enemies, and can take down bosses decently as well. They're kind of the opposite of poison decks in a way, as they're very good at taking down normal enemies, but not amazing against bosses, especially ones like the Insatiable that you kind of have to finish off quickly. And just make sure that you have enough energy to get back so he doesn't just eat you whole. But taking down the normal enemies easier is making it so you have a lot of health for the bigger bosses, and if you build up a really good Shiv deck, which I think is really easy to do in this meta, with some really great cards like Fan of Knives or Knife Trap, and we have some good reoccurring cards like Blade Dance, Cloak of Daggers, a lot of cards like that. Another reason why I think these Shiv decks are amazing in this meta is because they really synergize well with just other types of cards, like, Deflect, or just some other overall good cards. Poison decks, you want to focus mostly on just having good poison and good defense. But Shiv decks, pretty good defense comes with Shivs, and you can kind of branch out to other small builds as well. Going back to what I said about Shiv decks having more versatility in the cards that you play it with, it works very well with cards like Afterimage, or honestly, even in Venom, which is a poison card, but can be useful because you're hitting the enemies with a bunch of different cards. Also, it's compatible with a lot of different relics, like Ninja Scroll giving a good start, and Kunai, Shuriken, and Fan, which are all also very compatible with Shiv decks. Next, we're talking about scaling. So these decks scale kind of differently in the three acts of this game. Poison decks will probably not be amazing in Act 1 unless you get like a very, very good start with your deck, getting some great cards. Act 2, you could be ramping up, and if you have some good cards, then you can be doing some pretty good stuff against people. But you're still not really up at your peak yet. And then in Act 3, if you have a good poison deck, you can just start running through people. Especially against bosses and elites. But still, what I said earlier about poison decks not being amazing against normal enemies stays true. Shiv decks, on the other hand, are decent in the first area. If you get a good start, just get like a Blade Dance or 2, accuracy, and just a few other good cards for Shivs, then you can have a great start. Then going into the second area, if you had a good first act, then you're going into even better second act, where you're getting even more compatible cards for Shivs. And then the third area is just honestly probably the weakest for the Shivs. But since you've been building up a great Shiv deck from the past 2 areas, you're not really going to have a problem dealing with the third act. So, the part where the Shiv deck kind of struggles the most, in my opinion, is the beginning of the first act and the end of the third act. The beginning of the first act, you're just starting your deck, obviously, but you don't have too many good cards yet for making your Shiv deck amazing, though you shouldn't struggle too much. But the end of the third deck is really where I think the Shiv deck struggles. Against the third act bosses, Shivs aren't amazing. They aren't great against Queen because you have to get rid of the whole Torch Head amalgam and then Queen while keeping up a steady spread of defense. And the Torch amalgam is chaining 3 of your cards, making Shivs a lot harder. But then you also have Door and Test Subject. Door is, I guess, fine into Shiv decks because Shiv decks can pump out a pretty decent amount of damage, so you can break down the door pretty easily and deal with the whole door pretty easily. But still, door couldn't be a problem if you don't play your cards right. And then Test Subject, in my opinion, is a very bad matchup for a Shiv deck. Shiv decks really rely on being able to burst down their opponents and not take much damage doing it. That is what Test Subject completely counters. Test Subject makes it so that the first 2 stages shouldn't be too hard for you, though you might take a bit of damage doing it. But the third stage is what is going to screw you up. With Shiv decks, the intangible is going to be really annoying for you. And in the third stage, he pumps out a lot of damage. So it's going to be really hard to go between dealing your big burst of damage and defending without, really taking a lot of damage and dealing enough damage to him because of his intangibles. Ending this talk, I don't think poison decks are terrible. I'm just saying that I think Shiv decks are better in this meta. But that doesn't mean poison decks are completely useless. You might make yourself a great poison deck and get some really good cards. I'm not trying to say that poison decks are completely useless, basically. So, in my opinion, Shiv decks are better, but both decks are viable. So, thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed, I would appreciate a like and subscribe. And with that, Spire 2 is awesome. I'm gonna go play some Silent now. Peace.